If you could project into the future to see where you would be in 1, 5, or 10 years' time with the same mindset that you have now, would you be achieving your potential? Today's interview with Agi Karamidis is an interesting one where he was faced with this very question. During a UPW with Tony Robbins seminar experience, he realised what his limiting beliefs were. And this interview is really interesting in delving into the process of if you were to stay the same as you are now, where would you be in that 1, 5, or 10 years' time? And would you be happy? Or do you recognize that now you have certain limiting beliefs? And if you decide to change those now, how would your life look in 1, 5, or 10 years' time? It's a really interesting question and a really interesting interview, and I hope that you enjoy. Have you ever had one of those gut-wrenching moments when life ground you to your knees and you found yourself asking in despair, why me? This podcast is all about sharing your stories and journeys, from asking why me to declaring this is why me. Discover how ordinary human beings like you and I have found their extraordinary levels of hope, courage, compassion, and provided a new perspective for greater potential and self-empowerment during their darkest defining moment. As a creative artist and coach myself, my guests and I discuss the interconnectedness of emotion and transformation in those moments, and how their actions then seize the opportunity for discovering their unfiltered and authentic voice, and ultimately their life's purpose. I invite you to join me each week as we share insights into how adversity can be turned into a unique advantage. Today's guest is Agi Karamidis, fellow podcaster at Personal Development Mastery and co-host of Personal Development Essentials. Agi was born in Greece and now lives in Colchester, Essex, and believes you need to stand out from rather than fit in with the crowd. Agi regularly puts daily quotes on his social media, and I feel that this particular quote I'm about to share will relate to Agi's story and his defining moment where in 2017 he recognised his limiting beliefs and how they were affecting his behaviour. The quote is from Kurt Vonnegut. Of all the words of mice and men, the saddest are, it might have been. Welcome to the WhyMe podcast, Agi.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited and I loved your introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's get into your story, Agi. How about you share with us your defining moment back in 2007?
It was when I went to Tony Robbins event, UPW, Unleash the Power Within in London. In that is a 4-day event for people who don't know what it is about. So it's 4 days of immense, very long days. On the 3rd day, there is a process called the Dickens process, where Tony Robbins takes all the participants, and we were about 10,000 of us. So we're talking about a massive room of people. So during that process, which takes 4 or 5 hours in total, he helps the participants identify their 1, 2, or 3 core limiting beliefs that they have been holding them back. And when I went through that process, I realized beyond any doubt what was it in my life that had held me back up to that point. And let me explain what I mean by that. Up to then, all my life up to then, I was a very closed and introvert person. I was very much apprehensive, shall we say, with speaking with new people. If there was a situation like a social or networking event, or even a seminar where I would go with other people who I wouldn't know, I would be the person that would probably not speak to anyone unless I knew the other person.
Right.
I would never, raise my hand to ask questions because I felt that maybe my question would be wrong, or what will people think. Anyway, I was very, very introvert, and I always thought up to that point that that's who I am. That is my personality, so I'm born this way. And yeah, obviously, this kind of behavior holds you back to
Yes.
many ways. You're not very social. You have very, very few people that you connect with. And it was on that third day of the UPW in 2017 when I realized exactly what was the reason for all that. And that was a limiting belief, a thought process going on inside my head all the time, especially when I was about to interact in such a situation. And that voice or that belief that I had was that people are not interested in what I have to say.
Uh-huh.
And interestingly enough, that day was the first time that I actually was able to verbalize that, to actually write it down, because I hadn't even paid attention to it. I hadn't noticed it. As I said, it was like, that's who I was. And it was on that day, on that moment, well, it wasn't a moment, it was probably 1 or 2 hours of very intense emotional reactions, which I will not expand on it right now. But it was when I realized that it was a limiting belief, and when the process goes on to project yourself in the future while keeping this limiting belief in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, to the end of your life, look at in your deathbed, looking back and still carrying on this belief. And that quote that you mentioned in the beginning about it might have been, which is very sad, that was the day when I realized that unless I do something and I change that, I'm going to carry on living a life which is certainly nothing like what I could have as my potential, if you want.
Wow. So that is a big moment. There are a lot of our listeners that will be quite familiar with that term introvert. There are a lot of people that grow up believing that this is who they are, this is their personality, and why does it need to change? And I love that you mentioned not being aware until that moment that that was actually a self-limiting belief. So explain to us why discovering something like that is so emotional at the time. And you don't need to get into the emotions if you don't want to, but for me, I know that's a very core shaking experience.
It was. And as for the emotions, it was very intense because Tony Robbins is very skillful at guiding you and making you feel. It's not just about thinking, oh, I have this limiting belief. It's very intense. And imagine in a room of 10,000 people where other people around you are going through their own clearing of or recognizing their limiting beliefs. I had my eyes closed and I could hear people around me, crying or screaming because it is very intense. And I went into a similar intense response of crying, screaming. I fell down. I mean, I'm glad I had tissues on me because I used a whole packet of, it was very intense.
Yeah.
The realization was that unless I do something, I change it, I'm going to live a life of regret. And that was, on that day, was very, very obvious that if for me, the regret about the past, about what you could have done and you didn't, is probably the most debilitating feeling, the worst thing, because there's nothing you can do. And especially if you reach the end of your life, that's it. You don't have another chance. It's over. So it was everything changed after that. And I would dare to say that it started changing instantly. Obviously, it didn't show up as results instantly, but the actions I started taking as a result of that were pretty much immediate.
So you've had this massive experience. Did that awareness then bring to the forefront of your consciousness all the other self-talk that was going on inside your head? So all the related thoughts that were feeding into that introversion?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And in many ways, I'm still an introvert. So I won't say that I have changed and I'm now the soul of the party if I'm out. However, what has changed is my ability to speak out to people without worrying that what I have to say might not interest them. Because if it doesn't, then it's really none of my concern. It is there's nothing. There's nothing I can do about it. And so the limiting belief was in a way was covering up a deeper fear that many people have, if not everyone, which is the fear of judgment. What will other people say? Mm-hmm. So in a way, for me, what I was doing or the way I was behaving was suppressing that fear, because if I don't speak to anyone, people won't be able to judge me, because so at least in that way I am safe. Yeah. I'm not sure if that answers your question or if I went through a different direction.
Yeah, it definitely does. And it gives an explanation as to why you were behaving in that way. And it also raises the point that introversion is not a bad thing. So what we're talking about here is less about the introversion itself and more about the reason why you were acting in that capacity, the reason that it was actually a fear of judgment. And so therefore, by staying quiet, you were avoiding that fear of judgment. So I would like to know, because this is a huge thing for so many people, recognizing the fear behind that behavior. It's not that simple just to step into it and through it. How did you manage that process?
It was gradual. As I told you earlier, the internal change started pretty much immediately. But of course, the results to show, it takes longer. It needs some time for the external world to reflect what's happening internally.
Yeah, sure.
I think it was probably it was a few months after I had done the UPW that I enrolled in a public speaking course. I remember very clearly because there was a free event, like a seminar at that time, which was like a presentation of the course, the public speaking course. And I went there, and it was the very first time. At some point, the instructor said, "I would like a volunteer." He didn't say what did he want to volunteer for, so I raised my head immediately. So it was something simple to do, but I would have never done that before. Yeah. And then I realized how important the ability to communicate and speak out your opinion in front of people was. So I enrolled on that course, and I think that course also, which was 5 days, we started Monday morning and we ended Friday afternoon. Very intense, and it was at that time when I realized, very much beyond any doubt, that yes, people are interested in what I have to say, and my story and my message is meaningful, and some people will find that inspiring or interesting or relatable in some way. So that was a big boost of confidence, apart from, the techniques or the structures, because you have to use, no matter how, you need to use some, shall we say, methods or ways of delivering a speech. But that was a big next step. Soon after that course, I had someone invite me to speak at an event.
Wow.
And I said, yeah, sure. I was afraid.
Yeah.
But I didn't, it was because it was my first really public speech. I spoke about mindset, which was a topic, still is a topic which I'm very much fascinated about, because
Yes.
personal development is my big passion. And yeah, I spoke in front of 40, 45 people, which was an incredible experience. And, getting out of the comfort zone really is what it facilitates growth. And the moment you decide to step out of the comfort zone and do it, then you realize that it wasn't so bad as you have been thinking inside your mind. And then it's really up to you to keep expanding that comfort zone little by little.
Yeah.
And then obviously after not long after that, I started my first podcast, which I was co-hosting, the Personal Development Essentials, which again, looking back at the person I used to be, having a podcast and sharing my opinion for whoever, because I have no idea who listens to it. That's the thing. So people will judge me in every corner of the world, but that's fine.
Yeah, well, like you said before, it's no longer about that, is it? And what I'm clearly hearing here is that you found your voice and how powerful that has been.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. That is a beautiful thing. Yeah.
It is. It opened up, one thing leads to the other. It creates like a chain reaction of events. Because you meet people, I met people which under other circumstances I wouldn't even approach them, people that I didn't know. So at networking events, which were my absolute nightmare, I remember at any breaks or whenever it was at a networking event, I would pretend to be busy on my phone, or texting, or it would. Looking back at it, I mean, it's in a way it's sad. I mean, I've even remember, and I will share that because I think that some people will relate to it. I would pick up my phone and pretend that I'm speaking to someone. There was no one on the line, but I would pretend, so that I would get over that uncomfortable feeling that, these are these people who I don't know and I have to speak with. So obviously that changed very much since then. So it's easy for me now. It's very simple. You just go and say hi to someone. No one is going to bite your head off for going and saying hi. But when you have that voice, it can cripple you if you let it intensify and dominate what's going on in your internal dialogue. It can cripple you, and of course it will limit your opportunities, because your behavior will really not be what you would like it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of fear is based on assumptions and making the assumption that people don't want to hear what we have to say, that people are not going to value what we have to say, making the assumption that we're going to be judged based on what we say. Once you realize that that is all based on assumption and that fear is projecting into the future something that hasn't happened yet, that can change everything. Now, I want to know, what has this done for your self-confidence? Do you need to work as much on that now, or is it becoming a habit to feel better about yourself?
confidence, that's a very interesting question, and it's a very big topic on its own. The short answer is yes, it has done tremendous, it has created a tremendous progress or change in my confidence, or what we perceive confidence to be. Because confidence is internal, really. Of course, your actions externalize it, but it is something. It is a state that we are. It is an ongoing process, I believe. It is not something that I would say, yes, now I am confident, period. And so I'm certainly much more confident than I was, especially in social situations or in interacting with people who I don't know.
Right.
So, and that for me is the key, because when I was used to limit my interactions to friends and family, that really limits your opportunities. I think that is one of the most important things, that unless when you meet with new people, you have new opportunities that appear to you. When you keep on speaking to the same 5, 10, 20 people, your friends, your mates, or your family members, the opportunities will be, shall we say, limited, restricted.
So it's certainly helped you widen your circle of influence, if you like.
Absolutely. And, with the podcast as well, when I started interviewing people, I realized that somehow I need to reach out to those people and ask them to be interviewed. So
yes, there is a process for that, isn't there?
I know you can relate with that very much.
Yeah.
But I found that there's nothing to it. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Someone would say no. And it's not a big deal. That's fine. I had and to be honest, I only had 2 people that said no, and that was probably because I was aiming much higher than
Good on
what.
you.
So I'm happy with that. With that.
Yeah. And look, not every podcast is going to be for everybody either. And before we started recording this, you asked me what it was that I saw in you to ask you, which I thought was an interesting question. And I liked that you asked that question, because I don't just ask anybody to come on this podcast. I look at the stories people have. I look at what they're projecting about themselves. And I'm looking for those people that understand overcoming challenges is a lifelong management that we will all do. There are always things that will come up in life. And so it's about equipping ourselves with those tools for all of those situations when they occur, because they will. And I love discovering people's stories. And one of the things that I used to have as my tagline for my business years ago was, everybody has a story if you're willing to listen. And I really think I need to change it back to that because it is so important. I mean, when we live our life on this earth, it's about connection. It's about connection to other people. Life is about connection to the earth. It's about connection to ourselves. And I'd love to know what you have to say about that connection to yourself and to other people. You've described it generally, but going back to that defining moment, do you believe that this has changed the future of your life, the present and the future of your life from that moment? Would you be the person you are today without that occurring?
It has changed extremely my life, completely. Once you change, I will speak general, but I will tell you about myself more specifically. I think generally, when you realize something that has been holding you back and you change it, inevitably your thoughts, your emotions will change, your decisions, your actions, and of course the results, what you will get in your life will change. So inevitably they will change. So Yes, I did find many more. You asked about connecting with myself within 100%, because it was probably the first time that I really saw something that I had inside of me, and that I was already in a, shall we say, self-discovery journey. I had started that probably 2 years before then, because I had that kind of a feeling of unease. Maybe it was when I turned 40 and something clicks at that time when you
Magical age at 40.
it is, yes. So I was already on a journey of what's going on. Something doesn't feel right. There was some internal discomfort, shall we say. But after that time, I started looking really inside me and picking things up and understanding and realizing more and more of why I behave the way I behave, where do my thoughts come from, why I have these kinds of actions, why I do what I do, why I don't do what I say that I would do.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's always been, since that time, it's been more and more looking inwards and discovering who I am. So that is certainly a much better connection with who I am on a mental, shall we say, and emotional level. At least, of course, there are deeper levels like the spiritual level, but that, I think, that followed afterwards. And
it leads me to ask another question.
sure.
You've just spoken about discovering your why you were thinking those thoughts, why you had that behavior, which flows on from the why you were thinking those thoughts. Why were those thoughts being created in the first place? Did you find your why? It's Vera-Lee from Australia, the founder of the WhyMe Movement and podcast. Well, one idea, one vision, one person. This self-funded podcast and movement has started to take a life of its own, which is exactly where I had planned it would be. To hear the stories of the far-reaching impact across many countries in this world, it humbles me to know that my vision is shared, understood, and positively influencing people to look at the changes they can make for their own adversity and how they can find the strength, the courage to be inspired and feel connected and empowered to use their adversity to their advantage. One of the best ways that you can help support the WhyMe Movement and podcast is to subscribe to the various channels, such as the podcast platform you are listening to this on now and the YouTube channel, which has much bonus content released. By subscribing, you will make sure that you are one of the first to find out who is coming up next, more about our guests, and the interesting questions that I ask them, which do not get released on the podcast platforms, and lots of other good bonus content. I always love reading your comments, and so please feel free to leave them on each of the platforms. The beauty of social media is that you can easily share single episodes or any of that bonus content from YouTube onto your own social media platform with your friends, which helps to bring this positive, inspiring message to far more people, allowing you to be an active participant in the WhyMe movement and vision. On Apple Podcasts, it always makes a big difference if you can leave a rating, review, and subscribe to the show. Let's get back to today's story.
Why were the thoughts created? I will try to oversimplify and say that there is, let's say, a set of programs or tapes, or imagine a jukebox for those who listen that are old enough to know what a jukebox is. There are some tapes, some records, some voices that keep on playing over and over again, and they are instilled in the vast majority of the time when we are children, before 7 years of age. And in one way or another, they become our thought patterns.
Yep.
And I think if anyone takes the time and pays attention to what it is that they think, they will realize that most of the time it is the same thoughts or thought patterns that happen over and over and over again. But because they are so subtle at times, unless we actually look at the thoughts and pay attention to the thoughts, observe them, then we just get carried by them or dragged by them to whatever direction they take us. I don't know if that answers your question about the why.
It does. And certainly it's a matter of looking back into those formative years and working out what were the messages that I was taking on. And I know that going through that process myself, I went through a process of working out why I ended up in an abusive relationship. I was, by everyone else's definition, successful, very intelligent person, knew what I wanted in life, and yet I ended up with this person who was probably the opposite of everything that I would normally be attracted to. And it was because of the vulnerable state that I was in at the time and a number of other factors. What I discovered myself was that the information I was being given from those people in my inner circle, I had miscommunicated that message to myself. And so there were certain things that growing up being told how to be polite, being told how to speak when it was, necessary and important, but you don't just blabble out nonsense. Little things like that were very good lessons to teach. However, my interpretation of them was a little bit warped. And I then internalized that into, well, then you don't go and step out in front of the class and make your mind known, because that would be rude on many occasions. And it probably would have been. However, what I didn't understand at the time was that wasn't actually what they were telling me. They were telling me to simply think about what I was going to say before I said it. And if it was going to harm someone, I would think twice. Be kind to others as you would to yourself. It was really that sort of a lesson. And as I said, I recognise that I misinterpreted that. So I'm wondering what messages you had in your formative years that were forming that basis of thinking, that habit of thinking.
There is one that came to my mind while I was listening to you, and it was, what would people think? So us saying this phrase right now makes no sense. What will people think? Because you know that many of us live their lives according to exactly this belief. So they do things or they don't do things based on the possible judgment of people. And when we say people, who do we mean? There might be strangers. There might be people who they won't have any impact on our life whatsoever. Right. So we take some actions or behaviors not to displease those people. And we don't even know that. You mentioned the word assumption earlier, and it is exactly that. We assume that if I do that, if I speak out, or if I interrupt someone who I have a good reason to, based on my belief system, then someone else might think that, Aggie is rude, but if I stop being, I think it's about authenticity, really, because I am who I am. So if I have an opinion about something, obviously I will be polite and all those things based on my values and my ethics and all those things. But eventually I will have to do what my internal situation tells me that this is the right thing to do. Then that is despite what someone might think or might not think. That's none of my business, really. And it is a path to failure and a path to living a sad life, really. And it took me, I mean, I'm saying this right now, but a few years ago, that's exactly how I was living my life.
Yeah. I'm going to talk through a little scenario. You mentioned earlier about you were the person that would go into a restaurant and you would make a pretend phone call because of that uncomfortable feeling. And Tony Robbins often talks about what you focus on, you will feel, and it is very true. Yes. So let's go into a different scenario. You now walk into a restaurant and instead of focusing on what you think everybody else is thinking about you and realizing that, in fact, they're in that restaurant, some of them will be thinking that way about themselves and others haven't even noticed that you're there. And it's that realization that you go, you know what? If I stop focusing on myself for a moment and I instead immerse myself in the experience that I'm in and take in what's going on around me and essentially drop my ego. Now, ego is an interesting word. Some people think that ego means I'm saying people are self-centered. That's not the case. The ego is simply our view of ourself. And so if we drop that view for a moment, we look from that different perspective, it really can change everything. Do you walk into a restaurant now and make pretend phone calls?
No, no.
Awesome.
It's
What
I
do
can't
you do?
even imagine myself doing that anymore. I mean,
That's great.
there
What
is
do you
not
do
that moment of feeling uncomfortable because I look around and I don't know of anyone. So it was. It comes to mind some kind of networking events or things like that when you walk in and you may not know anyone. So what do I do now? I just walk to someone. I would have a look and someone who instinctively draws my attention.
Yes.
I'll just walk in and say, hi, how are you? I mean, it's as simple as that. And I won't really concern myself with what shall I say afterwards or how the conversation might go or try to prepare it in my head so that it is ready. I will just go with the flow. I believe in, and that is really confidence, which you mentioned earlier. I have the confidence that somehow I will manage to hold a conversation with a stranger because I've done it many times in my life.
Yeah. So you've now created this scenario that you know what that situation is like. So there's no need to fear because you have positive outcomes that you've had from it. So instead of making those assumptions and having that fear, you now see opportunity to meet new people. That's a beautiful thing.
And it's the best thing to really just go out and connect. And what other better way to get rid of a fear than facing it? Actually, I think that's the only way you can get rid of a fear. Just face it and realize that what was it? It was just a pattern of thinking inside my head. It was nothing real about it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to come back to something you said earlier too, just before we wind this up, because I know you need to go. You were talking about what's the worst thing that can happen, and someone can just say no. And it's focusing on essentially role-playing that the first couple of times until you get used to the idea. Okay, if someone says no, then what? Do I then just go on to the next person? So again, it's less about focusing on yourself. If they said no, what does that say about me? And instead thinking, well, there's lots of reasons they could have said no. You know, so again, it's taking that focus off our own insecurities and just accepting what is and moving on. Moving on to the next no.
You know, there is Yeah, of course. And what you said, and you mentioned the ego earlier, and that's something that I have, and getting out of thinking what will people think about me or how well I should perform. And that especially is in a situation where you give a speech maybe or present a podcast. So rather than thinking, oh, will I say the right words, or because that will perpetuate the feeling of fear when you think about how well you perform. So rather than that, it's better to focus on how will I serve my audience or the people that I'm going to speak to, and that really takes away the fear, because you are doing something completely different. It's not about yourself anymore. It's about the people that you are speaking to. So that is and actually I think I learned that from Dean Graziosi, who is one of our mentors.
Yeah.
That is the best way that I've found to remove the element of stress and fear before an event or a speech or things like that. That it's not about me. Yes, I am the person speaking to others, but it is what I can do for them. How can I serve them? How can I share my message in a way that they will get influenced or inspired, hopefully, to do something with what I'm telling them.
Yeah, it's very true. And it comes back to looking at how our message lands, doesn't it? And if we have what our viewers or listeners, whoever they are that we're talking to in the different scenarios we've just discussed, it's about what they're getting out of it. And so again, that's taking the focus off us personally and on the message, on the importance of the content. And I am in agreement too with and I also agree with not preparing too much, not over preparing and getting caught up in the technical memorizing, if you like, part of it. And that's why I don't have any question once we talk about your story, and everybody on this podcast, I don't have any questions prepared, because what I love about this is hearing the story, and when curiosity comes into my mind, I have a question, I ask it like I would any conversation with a friend. And it doesn't matter that this is the first time we've spoken to each other. We've conversed a bit on message, but this is the first time we're face-to-face speaking. And yet to be able to make that connection and feel relaxed about that and be sharing, it's a wonderful experience.
Absolutely. Yes.
I'm so glad you found your voice.
So am I. Yeah, absolutely. It is, sometimes I think I look at myself a few years back and I say, who is that person? It's, and anyone, I believe, that has gone through a transformation in life. It can be all sorts of different transformations, of course, but you tend to look back and really not recognizing that. It's like a distant relative.
Yeah.
And it's really not that long ago. Maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago that I was that person that really wouldn't speak out his thoughts or his opinion, or would never raise his hand to ask a question, even though I had a burning question.
Yeah.
And then I would, funny, I just remember. And then I would not ask the question myself, and I would listen to someone else raising their hand and asking the same question that I was about to ask.
Yes.
And that would only make me feel even worse at that time. But, oh my, I should have asked it. So
I relate to that.
It kind of brings you down like in a spiral, because then your self-worth gets lower, and so it is one of the most important things, I believe, to find your voice. And that's why my motto in my podcast is to stand out and not fit in. Fitting in is easy in a way, but it's hardly fulfilling. And I believe each of us has a purpose and a potential with what to do with this time that we have on this planet, and by trying to conform and fit in order not to displease strangers or assume that we displease them, that's really wasting not only our life, but I feel of it as also our duty or our purpose, or why our soul decided to come here and to live this experience. So we are doing a disservice to other people, to humanity, and also to our spirit, however you want to define that. I think it does not serve anyone to just fit in and try to hide and not to express who you really are.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole point, I think, to be authentic, be who we are, and create that ripple effect around us with who we are as authentic human beings. And if that means standing out, yes, we have to stand out. Each of us in a different way, of course, but just do what feels right in our heart. And we're going to face some judgment for it. Yeah, sure, that's fine. There is one quote, because you started the episode with a quote. I'll try to remember how it goes exactly. It says the only way not to be judged is by saying nothing,
Yes.
doing nothing, and being nothing.
Correct.
That's yeah.
I know that
If
quote.
someone chooses to say nothing, do nothing, and be nothing to avoid the criticism, yeah, I think it's sad.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And let's bring up Dean Graziosi again. You only need to be better than yourself yesterday.
Constant and never-ending improvement. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So the last thing, no regrets from that moment now that you are the person you are?
Nothing major. There are always some small things that on reflection I would say that maybe I could have done that differently. But then again, regret, I probably wouldn't use the word regret, because now I realize more and more that the things that theoretically, if I could go back and do them in a different way, I haven't done them in a different way because of a reason, and there is always a lesson to be learned. So I think it's a very interesting question, because I never thought of that before. So yes, I wouldn't say that I have, nothing comes to mind as a regret, especially in terms of, the big things that, oh my God, I really wasted a huge chance or things like that, because I take them. Some small things, I think it's part of life to say, I could have done that, but it doesn't matter, I think.
Yeah.
No big regrets, no.
Oh, that's good. More performance improvements. That's the way I like to look at it.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, and I actually look forward to failing forward, because I know that the faster I fail, the faster I will reach the end goal, because I will learn those lessons.
Yeah, it is so important, and it's something that again holds so many people back. The need to not to fail, not to make mistakes. Again, I will speak for myself. I was like that. I was terrified of making a mistake. I was trying to do everything that I could to prepare. Obviously, I couldn't. It's impossible. You can't prepare for any eventuality, no matter how much it might take you the whole life. But
life's unpredictable.
So
In some
yeah, the
ways.
mistakes fail forward it's never a mistake as long as you learn from it.
Correct.
Mistake, I think the only mistake is doing the same mistake over and over again. That's the only mistake.
Yeah. Yep, like a pattern of behavior. If we don't learn, it'll keep happening until we do, or we just won't and we'll keep suffering because of it. Yeah, very true. Now, if people would like to get in contact with you, Agi, how can they do that?
Sure. So usually I direct people to my Facebook group, which is called Personal Development Mastery, which you can find on Facebook. I also have a website /blog, which is in a need of some kind of freshening up, but it is there. So there is information there, quite a lot.
Yeah, there's some good content there.
agikeramidas.com.
Wonderful, and I'll put those links in the description when we release the episode.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Agi. Well, another story, more WhyMe moments, and more reasons to feel inspired to change your adversity into your advantage. An integral part of the vision of the WhyMe movement is the ICE acronym, I's for Inspire. When you feel inspired, you are more likely to take action. C is for two things, actually. Connection. You are not alone in this world. There are always people here who want to help you get through your adversity and feel positive about your life and your purpose. It is also for courage. Courage, in my opinion, is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And there lies the importance of connection. For sometimes we don't feel we have the courage to do things on our own. And yet once we have the emotional support of those people who we trust, it can help us to feel that fear and do it anyway. And lastly, the E is for empower. When we have that connection and the courage and the inspiration to know, get our clarity of purpose, well, that is when we feel empowered to take the action that we want to do to change some aspect of our lives for the better. If you would like my personal support in this area to help you get through adversity in your life, you can contact me at Vera-Lee Original on social media.